Welcome to the HReSource podcast.
Our special guest for this episode of the HReSource podcast is Dame Stephanie Shirley, a pioneering entrepreneur, innovator, problem solver, and philanthropist. If you thought running a business of workers who were home-based and equality and inclusivity in the workplace were new concepts, you might be surprised to hear they were the cornerstone of Dame Stephanie's first company, Freelance Programmers, founded in 1962. It was ultimately valued at almost $3 billion and made 70 of her staff millionaires. In this podcast, we investigate Dame Stephanie's love of maths, early career in computing, the sparks and obstacles that led to forming the company, a girl named Steve, relationships, partnerships, public speaking on a global scale, and ultimate sense of accomplishment in being a hugely successful venture philanthropist. Not simply offering financial support to causes close to her heart, such as autism, the charity Autistica, and specialist schools, but in so doing providing the strategic focus and idea generation to help ensure such support delivers successful outcomes. Her memoir, Let It Go, is one you will not be able to let go. I read it in a day, and it's no surprise this story of success, born out of hardship and tragedy, kinder transport refugee to almost topping the Times Rich list for the self-made woman, is soon to be made into a film produced by BAFTA winner Damian Jones. To find out more about Dame Stephanie and to access the books Let It Go and So to Speak, go to steveshirley.com. But for now, don't go anywhere. Stay tuned in, stay listening, because this is one conversation you really don't want to miss. I'm delighted to welcome to the HReSource podcast Dame Stephanie Shirley, a pioneering entrepreneur and philanthropist whose remarkable creative thinking solved problems for clients that not only helped grow a substantial business enterprise from very modest beginnings, but in the process changed our thinking on company structure and governance. Having read Dame Stephanie's frank and very moving memoir, Let It Go, which I highly recommend, it's clear Dame Stephanie has overcome a series of significant challenges, yet despite this, or perhaps as a result of this, continues to make a positive contribution to our lives. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, Dame Stephanie.
Lovely to be here.
Now, no doubt a number of our listeners will be aware of your story, but there are some that may not be so familiar. Could you possibly share an outline of your career journey from your arrival in England, July 1939? You were one of the 10,000 kinder transport children, to your life and works now.
Well, it is a long life, so it might be a rather too long a story. My refugee start is enormously important to the whole of my life because I had this trauma of leaving my family, being put on a train, sent off to, in fact, very loving foster parents, which was very successful. But it was new food, new family, new language, new nationality, because the life on the continent of Europe was very different to how things were in England. It took me quite some time to become anglicized. But what that did for me, David, is that it made me able to deal with change all my life. And that's very important in the digital world. It's important to entrepreneurs. What we're doing is new things all the time, making new things happen. And to have that upset early in my life means that nothing much phases me anymore. I became, I was going to be the world's greatest mathematician, but at the age of 20, I realized that this wasn't going to happen. I started work at the age of 18 and soon discovered that I did not have it in me to be a sort of an academic mathematician. But I was lucky that the computer industry came along. You needed mathematics in those days. So I was one of the early pioneers. I'm sorry, I'm just...
Did you work on that fabulously called Ernie, the premium bot?
that was a pretty early computer. It was a special purpose computer, but everybody thought I could help people win on the premium bonds. But in fact, of course, it was just a wonderful opportunity to get right into the heart of computing and find out all about the bits and the bobs.
All the programming. And that was that Dollis Hill?
That was the Dollis Hill Research Station, which was a hotbed of scientists, really. I met my dear husband there, but it was a very nice place for women to be.
But you were finding some early stages of that working relationship challenge as well. And did you not want to sort of progress yourself? And one of the bosses was quite adamant that you weren't going to get either the promotion or the further training you wanted.
Well, I made a facile comment about how nice it was to go into an organization with hundreds of intelligent young men. But really, it was quite a sexist environment. I mean, even to the extent that there were two pay scales, and they went by age. There was one pay scale for men and one lower scale for women. And this sort of really began to irritate me. And I became sort of fairly assertive, when people offered to help me carry my equipment, I would reply somewhat aggressively, actually. I believe in equal pay and will carry my own things. Nowadays, of course, I'm very delighted when somebody carries my stuff for me, but there we go.
Quite an early demonstration of how life was.
Yes, the default position really was women were second-class citizens. We were kept out of most financial activities, so that I couldn't open the company bank account without my husband's authorization. I couldn't work on the stock exchange. I could write software for the stock exchange, but I couldn't actually work on the stock exchange. Women were second-class citizens, and I began to resent that. And really, that drive for women's empowerment has become part of my life, a very important part of my life. And I'm surprised that today I still am doing things for women's organizations. I speak to a lot of not-for-profits.
But the reality is, I think there's still a level of bias and discrimination that takes place that you'd think, in light of 1962, you created this powerful women-focused software business that was set to change the world. I mean, that in the way that we haven't learned lessons, and there's a lot of work to be done.
We do still have an enormous amount of bias.
Yeah,
I come across it for age. I come across it for gender, and I work quite a lot about the bias against people with autism who tend to think in a completely different way, as my late son did. And that is now something that allows me to help the IT industry, because it is those sorts of skills, the pattern solving skills, that IT people, IT organizations, you need that.
absolutely.
And at the same time, the autistic people can offer those sorts of skills.
It's the neurodiversity.
Yes.
Area, which I really feel quite passionate about. There's a lot of when I think back of individuals that I've worked with historically who probably weren't diagnosed, but clearly had skills and were just considered to be a little bit odd, a little bit different, because the social skills weren't as refined and as engaging as other individuals in a workforce. So then they tend to be, because they're different, they get a bit ostracized, which is just, painful to watch.
I mean, I would never have got into a field like autism had my late son not been born on the autistic spectrum. And so you finish up knowing quite a lot about it and then starting to do something about it. You really have that drive to use your intellect to make something happen. Just
going back to the story in the Dollis Hill and Ernie we were talking about, your and I mentioned your business started in '62. What was the catalyst to really drive that forward? I think we've touched on two of those things, but what really drove you to that?
Oh, David, it was very much the glass ceiling. I was sick and tired of being patronized. I'd been patronized in Germany as a Jew. I'd been patronized in England as a woman. And I just wanted to set up. It was like a crusade for women. I wanted to set up an organization that was the sort of organization that I wanted to work with, flexible, that other women would want to work for. And so it started as a company of women, a company for women. It was an early social business. And of the first 300 staff, 297 were women. So we really drove that anti-discrimination policy or positive discrimination policy for many, many years until sex discrimination legislation came in. And we had to change our employment policies and start welcoming the men.
The irony. The irony of the legislation, which is supposed to increase diversity and women into the workforce, there you are as pioneers, and then you're the one getting told off for the fact you.
Yeah, but I couldn't really argue. It was so good.
No.
One thing that's really happened, I suppose, is that all the legislative things have those fences have fallen. So much as a disability. I used to talk about my son and sort of say, well, he can't speak and he can't do that. And he, very much the sort of negative side of his condition. Whereas now we've really learned to accept people with autism as just part of the human spectrum.
Absolutely.
And realize that it's very conceited to think that people with autism have to fit into your or my way of operating. We need to learn what it's like to be autistic.
And that realization, I guess, with your son Giles was shortly after you'd set the business up, wasn't it? You'd I think probably the year after you'd set him. Was he born in '63?
He was born in '63.
And initially, there were no signs that Giles had any symptoms to be particularly concerned about. But
looking back, there probably were hints there, David. But no, we had a very good start, and I think it was probably the happiest period in my life.
And that was the classic situation where you're trying to sort of multitask, world-class multitasking, starting for business. Have just recently got married. Moving location, having a child. But what you tapped into with your business and why its success grew was the fact that you had identified a need, which is obviously the programming, the software services that were required that you could deliver a service on. But the resources you need were the people, and the resources to which at that time in the country, there was plenty of resource, but were being overlooked, were women who had the skills, the intellect, the education, but were not allowed to really consider being back in work because either they had a child or they'd got married and just decided this is what you're supposed to do because that was the culture of the time.
Very much so, yes.
And that's how you were able to grow such a strong, dedicated and loyal workforce, because at the time...
Nobody else was recruiting in that part of the fish pond. So I had the pick of 51% of the population. Wonderful. So really a super company.
And I thought it was quite interesting as well when you compare and contrast, because as the business grew, you were looking to go into different countries and different environments as well. And that didn't always work because the likes of Denmark, their policies and their procedures towards women was far more open and much more on a level par. So you didn't really have the resources to get in. So it became a business that you grew. Obviously, over time, you're developing a workforce that have got a lot of passion, a lot of interest, and then somebody decides they're going to try and take you on at your own game, and it was somebody that you'd had very close to you as well, which must have been quite painful.
Yes, I know now that service companies in particular have so-called breakaway groups about, on average, every 7 years. And I must say my record isn't much better than that. The thing is that every new idea stems from something else. So we do build on it. We do climb on each other's shoulders. And for people to break away is upsetting, and it is a management problem, not an ethical issue.
And understandable as well that you're garnering that talent, that ambition, that skill, and one of those outlets for that ambition is to do it for themselves. It's a fine line to draw. You can't expect everybody necessarily to.
It's precisely what I did, you know.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So it'd be a bit hypocritical, wouldn't it, just in some ways to say, well, actually, you can't.
I can do it, but not nobody else is allowed to set up on their own. Business has suited me, actually. It's never boring. You bring into it all your general people skills. You bring into it the need for mastering finance, mastering marketing in particular, because I think most of us start off thinking in terms of, building up a lovely, lovely product, and then thinking, well, why is nobody beating a path to my door to buy this? And you begin to turn everything upside down and realize I've got to listen to what people are wanting.
Yeah, and one of the things that you did, and I think you shouldered an awful lot of the responsibility for getting to where you needed to be, was because you were doing a lot of the calls, the sort of what we would call now the telemarketing.
Most people weren't doing telemarketing because I was selling to quite senior people. So they weren't generally using the telephone. And I did. It worked very well for me. But eventually, of course, there were whole teams of people doing marketing and selling in different divisions and sectors and so on. The thing was that the more the company succeeded, the less I had to offer it. And the less, to be honest, I enjoyed it. Eventually, when one was doing a whole lot of corporate stuff and quarterly results, and I was bored silly. Yeah. And you do them dutifully and professionally, but it's not what I want to do. I'm much better starting new things, getting it to a stage where it's financially sustainable, and that it is freestanding of me managerially, freestanding of me financially. And if I keep to that area, I'm so happy. I don't tread on anybody else's toes, and I can just gloat over the successes that other people build from my startups.
Yeah, which is exactly the way that it worked for your organization all the way through to PLC. And you got to a point where you were able to, I think one of the other elements of the business structure that I really applaud is the way in which you wanted to find a way to share the ownership of the business with the staff. That
yes.
is and it went a little bit beyond the sort of John Lewis partnership. It really gave people life-changing financial opportunities. Well,
we managed to develop 70 millionaires among the staff. I'm very proud of that.
That's tremendous.
It's interesting what they've done with money as well. Not everybody has gone around the world wining and dining. Many have really used their wealth for social purposes, and that's nice to see.
Yes, because obviously it's giving back, which is an awful lot of what you've been about yourself.
Yes, I think I was given so much as a child. What else could I possibly do but give back? And so that's what my life has been. As a child, you learn the biblical thing, it's better to give than to receive. And you think, absolutely not. I want to get these presents in. I want them for me. And as you mature, you realize, my goodness me, that's true. There's so much pleasure in giving. It's such a positive thing to develop a social business, to develop a charity, to see it through to a sustainable business, and then just stand by and watch what happens. I finished up, of course, as a philanthropist.
Yeah.
What do I do with real wealth? I'd got a profoundly vulnerable child, so a lot of things that perhaps I might have chosen to do were not open to me because I wanted to stay close to him geographically.
Yeah.
He obviously made an enormous difference to my life, but I have enjoyed the building up of the charitable side. I've given away social investment, really, because I talk about being a venture philanthropist, but I've given away something like 68 million to date. And that has largely gone to autism, about 75% to autism, because there I'm really a major donor, certainly in Europe. Where's my arithmetic going? About half that to information technology, which is only right and proper that the wealth that comes from the IT industry should go back into the industry from which it stems.
Mm-hmm.
The remaining few million has all gone on commissioning works of art, setting up artistic or cultural activities. So in a sense, that reflects what my life has all been about.
When you talk about venture philanthropy, that is a slightly different way to, because we can all feel good about ourselves when there's a, if it's Red Nose Day, or if there's a charitable event going, or somebody's on Just Giving and they're doing a marathon and you're putting some money towards that. You feel a momentary that element of satisfaction that you're giving something back. But that's a charitable donation. Nothing wrong with that. But with your approach to venture philanthropy, that's far more engaging, isn't it? You get directly involved with the projects.
I think it's just like being an entrepreneur in business. You see some sort of problem. You think, I wonder how one could deal with that. You start thinking, what we need, perhaps we should try this. Let's do a feasibility study on that. And you're building up a project. And some projects are finished in 3 months. Some go on for many, many years before they become sustainable. And the sheer creative satisfaction of setting up a school, of setting up a support charity, of setting up a research charity, these are long-term things. It took me 17 years with my first charity to get it sustainable. 5 years with the second one, and that was the big one, 30 million on Prize Court School. Only 2 billion really on the last one, which is the most strategic of the lot. So I'm really had a wonderful time in the last 25 years learning to give away my money wisely. You'd think it would be easy, but actually it's not easy to give money away wisely, or for that matter, without patronizing the beneficiaries.
Yeah, and in the story that the second school that you're talking about is Priory Court.
Yes, Prize Court.
Which sounds a fabulous setup in relation to that. But it was the way the entrepreneurial flair of getting this thing driven through. It was, you talked to the DFE, you spoke to a guy called John Woodhouse who was involved in that as a bit of project management to try and or some idea and advice and signposting. You identified the talent to come in as a head teacher, and you're driving all of that forwards. And then you've got this guy engaged, and then thinking, right, well, this better happen. It's such an entrepreneurial position to be in, isn't it? It's like, right, okay, what about the building? And of course, the building is a money pit because it's listed. I've had some experience of having to deal with listed premises before, and my heart just went out to him. Just start talking about the things that were wrong with it and had to be put right. It was one thing after another, but you got there.
But we tend to think of buildings as being a capital asset, whereas always it's the people who are the asset, and buildings are just a cost of keeping the rain from our heads.
That's right. It needed a lot of adapting, though, didn't it? Just a bit. It was built for a certain purpose, but that's the appreciation, of course, of having your son who had such a high degree of autism, that you were able to understand what was required, so that the stairways had to be in a particular direction so people could see people coming, and all of the sharp edges and everything else had to be removed from what's quite an old and very traditional building. And
I could feel that building almost sighing with relief as it was developed into its worthy purpose. My excitement at the moment is that school, 20 years on, is now looking for a second site to develop so that it can do its good work for more people, for more pupils, for more students.
And the actual catalyst for our court was a trip that you had to Boston, if I remember rightly.
That's right, yes.
And that was because there was a groundbreaking approach, which was a Japanese of origin, that was being adapted and used in this school in Boston. And you went with a colleague across to visit, and you both came away with different sort of perceptions of it, but you could see the typical, again, entrepreneur, the bigger picture. You could see the prospect of taking what was a whole approach to the way of autism being treated. Because I think Giles, if you don't mind me talking about this, but Giles went through a very difficult period in his well, not so much education, but he was in an institution where really it was containment. There was no thought of what they might do to develop skills, attributes, education and opportunity. It was very much about containment and almost being out of the way, so these people didn't interfere with other people's lives. The
fair? World is better these days. When you even walk around your locality, you will see people of various forms of vulnerability. 25, 50 years ago, that just didn't happen. They were isolated in my son's case. It was called a subnormality hospital. It was an asylum. Yeah. That's what it was. You were sectioned and you went in there apparently for life. But they were not good periods and in social history. And we do know better now how to develop and help people lead healthy, long and happy lives.
And the approach really was quite simple, and it's about activity and some exercise and some focus and actually care and attention, which I think you came across with perhaps one of your early recruits for the first school that you had, that was able to sort of work with Giles and they bonded to a certain extent. You could sense that things were starting to develop. So innate sense of what needed to be done was probably within this chap you'd employed, but hadn't really been articulated in any sort of structure, which I think you saw when you went to Boston.
Yes, I think chance always plays a part. It was almost by chance that I was in the States at that time. I to spend some time with a colleague without making a great big fuss of it, but we needed to have some good quality time together. She was going to the States, and I sort of said, I think I'll come with you and see what you're doing there. So that suddenly developed into a school.
As it does.
I've had a wonderful life. I really have.
That's tremendous. I mean, one of the other venture philanthropy initiatives, or philanthropic initiatives, was the Oxford Internet Institute. And that's away directly from autism, but what drove that for you?
Well, I was approached by a couple of sort of business acquaintances. They were not friends at that time, who were fundraising for some interdisciplinary institute associated with Balliol College in Oxford, which they and I was associated with. And my first inclination was, no, this was, it's beyond me technically. And then they really persuaded me that they were not asking for my technical involvement. They were asking for some long-term strategic help. Yeah. And that this was something that would also not only help the sector, the study of life online, which is what it's really about, but it would also provide for me a link into the industry of which I'd spent my life at. So that's about as technical as I get these days. I thoroughly enjoy my work with the Oxford Internet Institute, as it came to be called. It's concerned really not with the technology, but with the social, economic, legal, and ethical issues of that network of networks. And I spent 10 years on its strategy board. Now I just am an honoured guest. I haven't been the last year, but I might go every couple of years to something that they're doing.
It's one of the taxing points I find with social media and the larger tech businesses, the likes of Google and obviously Facebook and Twitter, is the view that they are actually publishers. In my view, you may disagree, but I actually see that they are publishing information, and that the ethical view in terms of what the damage could potentially be done with the information they're sharing. I don't know whether that's an area that they've touched on, or I'm sure.
It's currently one of the focuses that they're working on to get rid of some of this misinformation, largely by learning where information comes from. And of course, if it comes from a creditable source, that's a good help to you. If you don't know where it comes from, the chances are it's not. It is false information. It's a funny old world, but reputation and ethics and doing the right thing as well as doing things right is still increasingly important, just as the technology becomes more and more, and its speed of change becomes faster, and there's no end to the development of technology. There is no end point, and that's what makes it so exciting.
I think it's the challenge of keeping the human interaction in line, if it can be, and that is a real challenge, because the technology is so advanced and can do so many things. I think we found that with, dare I say, elections that have happened where people have been manipulated because people understand how algorithms work and understand how to portray and present information that might not be strictly true, but knows how to influence a population. And as such, we've seen that evidence in the States, and we've seen it in the UK with areas like Brexit, that we've had difficulties. But I don't want to get to too controversial ground here, but I just personally view it's a very serious business. It's one that fascinates me.
Well, it's the one with artificial intelligence.
Yes.
The big query. Who will come out on top, man or machine? And the idealist in me says, well, of course it has to be man. But in fact, since about the 1930s, Turing was talking about the machine taking over. And I sort of believe that, perhaps not in my generation, but that it will happen. We are increasingly seeing examples which are getting so close to the machine taking over. Yeah.
It can be very scary, which is why the work of the Institute and others is so very important. And when you look at the moment, we're trying to make this sort of like a pandemic-free discussion, which I think is absolutely right. But there's one point on this that I think we can't avoid, which is the impact of COVID-19 and charitable organizations and their ability to be able to source funds when there's so many other priorities, in inverted commas, out there. What's your view on that, Dame Stephanie? Do you think that we need to be concentrating our efforts and maybe thinking differently about how we can support some of these good causes, social concerns?
Well, I think a lot of good causes are coming around to the idea of making themselves self-supporting anyway. The school, for example, has got a bakery, and it bakes bread to make money to pay for the bakery. And so it's not just always asking cap in hand for people to support the wonderful not-for-profits and the work that they do, but actually thinking about how you can create the wealth to make the world a fairer place.
and make them sustainable. I mean, if that's
and if it's not sustainable, it's just a question of you make things good for 6 days, 6 hours, 6 months.
yeah, and I guess in that regard, there's a focus for some people that have got the skills at the moment to be able to consider perhaps looking at venture philanthropy, because it can involve money, and in your case, significant amounts of money that you put into it, but it's more than that, in that you've been able to share your experience and your skills.
I think it's much more than just money. It's sort of leveraged by introductions, by times, by networks, by experience, and that's what makes it fun, both for the venture philanthropist and for people who are benefiting from it. They can see it growing, they can see it doing things in a very positive way. And the relationship between donor and recipient is a much more healthy one. Nobody finishes up in the red because I get as much from my gifts. It's amazing how much I get from the gifts that I make.
Because there is a feeling, and an area where I sort of touched into when I left my work for the law firm after a period of time. I wanted to be able to do something which was more helpful to society as a whole, and I think that's a place we get to in our lives, and we start to think, well, actually, what have I done with my career? I read your book, and I thought, yes, what have I done with my life? It's you've had one incredible impact on the world, and I think we all need to aspire to maybe not achieve quite what you've done, but why not? Certainly, I'm going to be asking my daughters and my son to read your book, and I think it's one that would give great inspiration. I mean, from a point of future, looking at venture philanthropy, how can people get involved? I mean, if they're even just listening to this now and thinking, oh yeah, this is interesting to me, what would be your advice?
Well, I mean, a good start, if we're being very practical, is my website, steveshirley.com. But there is so much going on that it's important to find something that you are interested in.
Your passion.
Yeah, but I'm passionate about certain things. You're passionate about other things. And the thing is to concentrate your philanthropy in those areas, things that are important to you from your college days, from your family, from your own experiences, something that really matters to you. And if you concentrate on things that you know and care about, then work is not just something you do when you'd rather be doing something else.
Absolutely. I have to say, there'll be people listening to this right now, Dame Stephanie, will be thinking, Steve Shirley? Where did the Steve, because they perhaps haven't seen the presentation. They haven't seen the books, and there are a couple of people out there who perhaps haven't done it. Please,
just a couple.
Just explain the genius that was Derek's idea when you were struggling with one or two things in the marketing side of the business. How did Steve come about?
In the early days of the business, I was writing lots of letters. This was before the days of email. Lots and lots of letters, basically introducing my company's services, and they got absolutely no response whatsoever. About 12 a week I would be sending out. And then my dear husband suggested that I stop using my proper name, the double feminine of Stephanie Shirley, but use the family nickname of Steve. And so I've been Steve Shirley ever since. And of course, nobody knows that Steve Shirley is anything other than a white male correspondent.
And it worked.
It worked, yes. I began to get some responses, began to get some interviews, began to get some work. I had a good story to tell.
It's sad. I mean, I would like to think now that we're in a different world, and that certainly wouldn't be the case. But at the time, there was such a view and a prejudice against any female entrepreneur that it needed that extra push. So I
noticed, though, that there's still a lot of androgynous names, Joe and Leslie, and J.K. Rowling, for example, didn't use her first names. In fact, I don't think I know what they are, because she wrote as J.K. Rowling. Now, I mean, that's very significant.
Yeah. We still got work to do, clearly.
Yes, we have.
Still
Yep,
got work
more
to
to do.
So just while we sum up here, that you've covered a fantastic overview of your career, some of the highlights of where you've been, and the way the business was able to give back to 70 staff directly financially, but far more than that. I think the impact, because of the success of your business and what you've been able to do with your charitable work and your philanthropy, it's clearly leaving a mark. But you're not finished. You're still very clearly involved in your charitable work as a supporter and advocate. The charity to which there's an association, obviously you've written a couple of books. The book that I've read called Let It Go, which is fabulous. We're going to put all of the details as how you might be able to find that in the show notes, so people will be able to see that. There's also a new book that came out of this period of reflection that we've had during lockdown, which obviously was a passion project of yours, which is So to Speak. Is that correct? That's a collection of your presentations and talks and keynotes.
Over the last 40 years, I've given speeches in all sorts of places, to heads of state, to village halls, on various topics, from my refugee start to women in society, to information technology, and of course, latterly, philanthropy. And I've selected about 30 of those and haven't really edited them. They're laid out rather nicely on the page. And so to speak, is really another view of the second half of my life, really concentrating on my public speaking.
And we touched on earlier the TED Talk that you'd given. There are TED Talks and there are TED Talks. And I'm a fan of the genre generally, because I do learn an awful lot from it.
Don't you think they're good? Yeah. One would never have thought that these short, focused 10-minute talks would have so much impact. I think they're really marvelous. I mean, mine has been seen by over 2 million people, and I think that's quite an amazing thing.
2.2 million and counting. A few more after today's talk. But I think, from my point of view, that was again good marketing in the way that you titled it as well. Not that you wouldn't be a big draw in your name alone, but also to talk about why do women have flat heads. I was convinced that the answer to that was going to be the banging up against the glass ceiling, but no, you had a different answer.
I think it comes from all the men patting us patronizingly on the top of our heads. There, dear.
Yes, I'm sure there's been far too much of that. But it highlighted to me the fact that you've adapted to yet another medium in terms of presentation. And I think you talk in your book about the fact that you weren't a natural presenter. You didn't find it an easy thing to do. You've taught yourself.
No, I didn't take to it at all. And in fact, colleagues really took the speaking engagements that I was offered. But now I really find it is a thing that I can do, where the balance of sitting quietly at my desk and doing the research balances with a presentation, which might be an hour plus 4 or 5 hours traveling and so on, and an enormous part of my social excitement and life comes from my speaking engagements. I've been all over the world. I'm now doing a lot by Zoom. For last week, I was talking to India. I've talked to Chile. It's really has given the Zoom has given a new dimension to public speaking.
And it's something that I will confess that was not a particularly comfortable medium for me.
Was it not?
No, even the family quiz. I'll cooking a meal, I'll disappear at the end of it when everybody's sat around just staring at each other. I find it quite odd. I'm okay, but that's why I actually have used it for the podcast medium, to be able to record audio and on occasion video. But I use that because I knew I had to improve the way I felt about it. So in some small way, a little bit like yourself, if it's something you're a bit frightened of, well, okay, just do it, but do it, learn how to do it, understand the technology behind it, and put yourself out there.
I always have that same feeling, David, when it comes to going for a new job.
Yeah.
If you're fully qualified for it, it's going to be boring. Look for something that's got a little frisson of fear about it, and that will be the job that really allows you to shine.
Because you're pushing yourself.
That's right.
It's the right job and in the right area, and you've got that desire. Then yes, you'll make it work for you. So that's brilliant. I was about to come up to actually ask you for your best piece of advice that you could perhaps give to somebody who may be starting out, and maybe they're starting out and have got a great idea for a business, or they've got that business up and going, but they're having one of those roller coaster dip moments where it's really not happening for them. What possible advice could you give them?
I think I've touched on it already. To concentrate on things that you know and care about, something that you really enjoy doing, and then get trained, get retrained so that you're at the leading edge, and then just take that jump of faith, leap out and do it, make it happen, go for it.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. Dame Stephanie, this has been a pleasure. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and the time you've given to this podcast, so much to learn. We could have had, having read the book, I was in danger of taking up about 5 hours of your time today because there's just so much in there. But we've touched the surface. Anybody who is interested in finding out a little bit more about Dame Stephanie, I will provide all the contact details in the show notes. But for now, Dame Stephanie, that has been wonderful. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Find out more and join our growing business community by visiting HReSource.co.uk.